Welcome back, learners. Let's continue with our discussion on the topic Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. Let's understand what happened after February. Under the provisional government, army officials, landowners, and industrialists were influential. Liberals and socialists worked towards an elected government. Restrictions on public meetings and associations were removed. In April 1917, the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin returned to Russia from its exile. Lenin demanded three things and termed them as April theses. He wanted the war to end, land to be transferred to the peasants, and banks to be nationalized. He also emphasized on renaming the Bolshevik Party to the Communist Party. Workers' movement spread throughout the summer. Factory committees formed and trade unions grew in numbers. When the provisional government saw its power reduced and the Bolshevik influence grew, they decided to take stern measures against the spread in discontent. In the countryside, peasants and their socialist revolutionary leaders pressed for a redistribution of land. Encouraged by the socialist revolutionaries, peasants seized a land between July and September 1917. Let's now discuss the Revolution of October 1917. The conflict between the provisional government and the Bolshevik grew. On the 16th of October 1917, Lenin persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of power. To organize the seizure, a military revolutionary committee was appointed by the Soviets under Leon Trotsky. The military revolutionary committee ordered its supporters to seize government offices and arrest ministers. By nightfall, the city was under the committee's control and the ministers had surrendered. At a meeting of the All-Russian Congress of Soviets in Petrograd, the majority approved the Bolshevik action. What changed after October? Industry and banks were nationalized in November 1917, which meant that the government took over ownership and management. The land was declared social property and peasants were allowed to seize the land of the nobility. The Bolshevik Party was renamed the Russian Communist Party Bolshevik. Elections were conducted in November 1917 to the Constituent Assembly, but they failed to gain majority. In January 1918, the Assembly rejected Bolshevik measures and Lenin dismissed the Assembly. Despite opposition, in March 1918, the Bolsheviks made peace with Germany at Brest-Litovsk. The Bolsheviks participated in the election to the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, which became the parliament of the country. Russia became a one-party state. After October 1917, this led to experiments in the arts and architecture. But many became disillusioned because of the censorship the party encouraged. The Civil War. The Russian army broke up and their leaders moved to South Russia and organized troops to fight the Bolsheviks, the Reds, during the 1918 and 1919. The Russian Empire was controlled by the Greens, that is, socialist revolutionaries, and Whites, pro-Tsarists, backed by French, American, British, and Japanese troops. These troops and the Bolsheviks fought a civil war. By January 1920, the Bolsheviks controlled most of the former Russian Empire. In the name of defending socialism, Bolshevik colonists brutally massacred local nationalists. Most non-Russian nationalists were given political autonomy in the Soviet Union, USSR, the state the Bolsheviks created from the Russian Empire in December 1922, making a socialist society. During the Civil War, industries and banks kept nationalized. Peasants were permitted to cultivate the land. Centralized planning process was introduced. Officials worked on how the economy will work and set targets for a 5-year period. During the first two plans, the government fixed all prices to promote industrial growth, 1927 to 1932 and 1933 to 1938. Centralized planning led to economic growth, but rapid construction led to poor working conditions. The schooling system developed and arrangements were made for factory workers and peasants to enter universities. For women workers, creches were established in factories for the children. Cheap public health care was provided. Modern living quarters were set up for workers. Stalinism and collectivization. The period of early planned economy led to disaster of the collectivization of agriculture. By 1927 and 1928, the towns in the Soviet Russia faced an acute problem with grain supplies. Stalin introduced firm emergency measures. In 1928, the party members toured the grain producing areas, supervising enforced grain collections and raiding kulaks, the name for well-to-do peasants. After 1917, the land had been given over to peasants. From 1929, the party forced all peasants to cultivate on collective farms called kolkhos. Peasants worked on the land and the kolkhos profit was shared. Between 1929 and 1931, the number of cattle fell by 1/3. The government of Stalin allowed some independent cultivation but treated such cultivators unsympathetically. In spite of collectivization, production did not increase immediately, and due to bad harvests of 1930-1933, over 4 million people died. Throughout the country, accusations were made, and by 1939, over 2 million were in prisons or labor camps. The global influence of the Russian Revolution and the USSR. In many countries, communist parties were formed, like the Communist Party of the Great Britain. Non-Russians from outside the USSR participated in the Conference of Peoples of the East, 1920. The Bolshevik founded Comintern, an international union of pro-Bolshevik socialist parties. Before the outbreak of the Second World War, the USSR had given socialism a global face and world stature. The USSR became a great power and its industries and agriculture had developed and the poor were being fed. By the end of the 20th century, the international reputation of the USSR as a socialist country had declined. So, we have reached the end of our discussion. Hope you found that helpful. Now you can visit EduRev to attempt the respective test so as to check your understanding of the topic. You can also find more amazing content on other subjects like maths and science and whatnot. So what are you waiting for? Go and check it out. Stay tuned for more amazing videos. Thank you.